This video is Unit 5 on animals, echinoderms, and fishes, learning targets 13 through 15. So echinoderms, these are animals that have spiny skin, an internal skeleton or an endoskeleton, water vascular system, and tube feet. Most adults in this group have 5-part radial symmetry, meaning that they have 5 lines of symmetry, as opposed to the normal any number of lines of symmetry. So as far as their anatomy is concerned, they do have this internal skeleton, which is called an endoskeleton. This is a new thing as far as animals are concerned. We've had exoskeletons and shells, and so the endoskeleton is a new animal thing. Humans have an endoskeleton as well, a skeleton inside our bodies. They also have something called the water vascular system. And the water vascular system is essentially this area filled with fluid, and this carries out many of the essential functions of echinoderms. So it's almost as if echinoderms are somewhat more complex than some of these other invertebrates, but have kind of taken a step back in this regard and have this water vascular system, which isn't a bad thing. It's just a different kind of thing than what we've been seeing with some of the other more complex invertebrates. Feeding, they use this a structure called a tube foot or tube feet, and these act as suction cups underneath the animal. Not only do they allow the animal to walk, but they also allow the animal to pull open prey. And so many of these echinoderms are bottom feeders. What I mean by bottom feeders is they kind of eat the stuff that's on the bottom of the ocean where they live. They're marine animals, and so they're bottom feeders. They just kind of eat all the stuff that falls to the bottom. But many of them, like this starfish here, is a predator. Are predators. They literally pry open their prey and kind of put their stomach on the prey and then suck them up and eat the inside of the clam or whatever it is that they're going after. So here's a picture of this water vascular system. You can kind of imagine the starfish shell around it there, if you wanted to do that. Not very pretty, but you get the idea. Oops. And it's just a system of these tubes, and they allow water to move through them. This is how the suction works on the tube feet as well. And this is how respiration and circulation occur in echinoderms. They have very simple gills, so they do have some gas exchange happening on gills, but for the most part, very, very simple gills, and most of this is happening through diffusion with the water vascular system, respiration and circulation, as well as excretion. And so if with excretion, you're going to have, they do have solid waste, and they have a digestive tract, so thinking like a more developed invertebrate, but they're getting rid of like ammonia through diffusion with this water vascular system. Didn't mention response. For response, they have scattered sensory cells for various things, and they have this, you can see it here better, this inner nerve ring. Actually, let me go back to this picture. This inner nerve ring that acts kind of like a brain, and you can see the digestive tract here in this picture as well. And you can see this orange ring here, almost like a brain. Scattered, scattered sensory cells for various reasons. Inner nerve ring. Very, very simple nervous system. For movement, we mentioned this a little earlier. They use the tube feet for movement, and their endoskeletons help to dictate this movement as well, much like our own Skeletons do that. For reproduction, they have external fertilization, and their larvae, this is a picture of a larva, have bilateral symmetry. So look more like what you would think of, like a upper level invertebrate. Their larvae actually have bilateral symmetry and move around in a different way than the adults do. So we didn't mention groups of echinoderms, but these are things like starfish, sea urchins, and some other things, but not very complicated group. All right, next is chordates, and chordates are a whole new group of organisms because anything that has a backbone is a chordate. There are a couple of chordates that do not have backbones, uh, but we will be mostly talking about the chordates that have backbones. But a chordate, by definition, is an organism that at some stage in their life have a dorsal nerve cord. Dorsal just means like the back of the body. Think of like a shark. The dorsal fin of a shark is what you see when it's swimming towards you. And they have a notochord under that. So you see this picture here. This is a very primitive chordate, and you can see the dorsal nerve cord here, and underneath it is this notochord. All right. When you think dorsal nerve cord, think spinal cord, and when you think notochord, this is a long supportive rod that runs through the body. It's not necessarily like a backbone. You have a notochord when you are an embryo, but that later solidifies and becomes what you know as your backbone. But there are some organisms that keep this notochord throughout their adulthood. These chordates also have something called pharyngeal pouches. The word pharyngeal, think of the word pharynx that we saw, so think throat. Sometimes you'll see them called pharyngeal gill slits, like you see here in this picture. Other places, pharyngeal pouches. These are paired structures in the throat that develop into gills in fish. Of course, we don't have them because we don't have gills. But at some point in our embryonic development, we do have these pharyngeal pouches, and so this classifies us as a chordate. Before we move to fishes, I do want to mention the two chordates that are not vertebrates, and they are called the tunicate and the lancelet. They look like this little thing here. Very simple organisms, nothing complex about them. So, moving on to fish. Fish are aquatic vertebrates. Remember, vertebrates, they have a backbone. So they actually have bones. This is a new thing. Aquatic vertebrates, most with paired fins and gills. Most with paired fins and gills. Let's talk a little bit about the evolution of fish. Fish were first jawless, meaning they didn't have a moving jaw, or it doesn't mean they didn't have a mouth, they just didn't have bones to keep that jaw opening and closing. It was just more like a soft mouth, or like a lamprey, kind of like a sucking mouth. Jawless with armor plating. Some fish remain jawless, but drop the armor, kind of like a lamprey or a lungfish. Very simple. Or not a lungfish, a hagfish. You see these kind of, as far as evolution is concerned, these are kind of like the remnants. They're towards the back. Still things that are alive today, but very primitive animals. Other fish develop jaws and paired fins made of cartilage. That's what we think of there when we think of like sharks. So these are organisms that did develop jaws that have paired fins, and hopefully you can figure out what we mean by paired fins. This is, if this is kind of like a fish here, These are the fins. They're paired, meaning that there's two of them. And then some sharks and rays have kept the cartilage, and so they're kind of like, again, more of like an evolutionary remnant. But all modern fish have dropped the cartilage and are bony. Now they have actual bone in their fish. So very few fish have just cartilage, and then even fewer fish don't have jaws. So they're kind of like an evolutionary remnant. Very successful. Sharks are obviously very successful animals, and it's benefited them to keep the cartilage, but bony fish by far and away have taken over the seas and the rivers and ponds and so forth. Now, essential functions. Um, every mode of feeding is seen in fish, meaning that you have filter feeders, you have bottom feeders, you have carnivores, you have fish that eat plants. So it's just, and you have fish that jump out of the water, like this here shark, and show its mouth. And so there's just every sort of feeding that's going on with fish. Respiration, gas exchange, happens through gills exclusively or almost exclusively. Some fish have very simple lungs, but that doesn't mean that those fish don't also have gills. And so you think of a fish like a walking catfish. It's a neat video to check out. The walking catfish can walk from one puddle to the next as puddles begin to dry up. They live in Africa, and so they can go and find water, and they can walk some distance in order to find, or you know what I mean by walk, kind of scurry like or flop around like a fish might do. Um, and they can breathe those lungs through for a temporary time. Uh, Fish around here that can do that are carp. They can use their lungs temporarily and like kind of gulp air, but they need their gills ultimately to continue breathing. Circulation. We're going to get some new terms here. Um, we have a closed circulatory system, which is not a new term, but they have a two-chambered heart. And so a two-chambered heart means that it's not just one pump that's going, and so it's a little bit more complex than what we're used to as far as hearts are concerned. We're used to this just one simple, very very simple heart that kind of pumps everything out, but this is a little bit more complex. So this circulatory system just has this. Another thing to note is just has this one kind of loop through the body. It doesn't make a double loop, which is what we'll see later with more complex animals. Response. Didn't mention excretion, so I will talk about that. They do have kidneys, and so this is a more complex, other than just the nephridia, which is kind of like a kidney or a Malpighian tube. Their kidneys control the water in their bodies because a fish has all the water they can get their hands on, and so they have to actually control the water in their bodies by excreting lots and lots of water with the ammonia out of their body. So they're just constantly getting rid of water, and this allows them to get rid of the ammonia that's in their body. So that would be excretion. Kidneys controlling the amount of water in their bodies. For response, they have a very well-developed nervous system and a brain. There is some thinking in fish. Is not as we think. They're not able to think about their own thoughts or anything like that, but they are able to make basic decisions based on stimulus. One of the things that fish have is this lateral line system, and you can see the lateral line on these fish, this line that goes down their bodies. And this is actually a sense organ that allows them to detect movement. It allows them to detect current. This is how fish are able to swim in schools with one another. And so kind of a perfect evolutionary advantage for their aquatic environments and for their fact that they live in schools. And so this is a good thing for fish to have. It does allow them to sense their environment really well. So for movement, fish have paired appendages with strong muscles. So they have paired appendages, meaning that not like an octopus that has just 8 tentacles that are kind of out there. Fish have a pair of fins, like we have a pair of arms. So this is kind of a new evolutionary advantage. They have a swim bladder that helps to keep them from sinking. That swim bladder will fill up with air, and it allows them to stay at a certain level in the water as they're moving. Here you see these fish schooling and swimming together. It's very safe. If a shark was to come through there, it can't get all of them. And so the population still is able to survive. And reproduction. Um, there's internal and external fertilization with fish. Fish are, give you a new word here, oviparous, meaning that they lay their eggs outside of the body. This means that, like a egg laying, think of a fish that lays its eggs, and, with an external fertilization system, the fish would lay eggs, and then the male fish would come and secrete sperm onto those eggs to fertilize them. Well, not all fish do this. Sharks are what we call viviparous. This prefix vive means live. This prefix ova means egg. And so sharks actually give live birth. So this is a picture of a shark giving birth here. The little shark just kind of swims out and is out in the open now as opposed to being hatched from an egg. So this is a new evolutionary advantage as well. Now, how have fish become especially adapted for the water? What are their adaptations for the water? They have gills. Their body shape, you think of a fish's body shape, they're very water dynamic as opposed to aerodynamic. This body shape is actually called fusiform shape. They have the lateral line, which also allows them to do well in water, and being able to feed in many various forms also allows them to be especially adapted for the water.